She is a princess who renounced her palace, title, and husband for love and freedom. Louise of Belgium fled the morning after her wedding in a torn dress, in tears, from a perfect prince. What did he do to her on their first wedding night? Why did her mother tell her to endure and remain silent? And then a duel, a psychiatric hospital, an escape through a barred window, and life under a false name. The king struck her from his life. The courtiers called her mad, and she only said once, "I served only my heart." Watch the video until the end, because you haven't heard this story as it truly happened. Scandals, conspiracies, passion, and revelations all await. She was born, as is proper for a princess, to hymns, in silks, amidst gilded walls. On February 18, 1858, at the Royal Palace of Laeken near Brussels, Louise Marie Amelia of Belgium was born, the firstborn of Crown Prince Leopold and Austrian Archduchess Maria Henrietta. The newspapers wrote with restraint, as if afraid to disappoint expectations. Everyone had expected a boy. But the capital still erupted with fireworks, for a princess was born, with the promise of greatness, with a predetermined future. Louise's childhood unfolded against a backdrop of perfect facade symmetry, marble staircases, and unvarying protocol. Her father, the future Leopold II, was rarely home. He was too preoccupied with dreams of tropical lands, of the Congo, of fame that could be bought at the cost of distant lives. Her mother spent her days in the stables. She adored horses more than society receptions. The children were left to governesses, schedules, and cold architecture. Instructions replaced love. Etiquette replaced warmth. Every day of Louise's life was meticulously planned. French in the morning, German at dinner, piano after lunch. The girl grew with perfect posture and a pulsating sense of uselessness. She was beautiful. Olive eyes, thick dark hair, a proud jawline. Everyone said she was a copy of her mother. But unlike her mother, Louise understood very early that a copy is not the original, and that being alike does not mean being loved. By the age of 6, she confidently rode side saddle. At 8, she played Chopin. At 10, she regarded her father with cold politeness. The letters he sent from Africa were as dry as his plantation reports. No tenderness, no interest, just obligatory lines: maintain your dignity, be a worthy daughter of your crown. She learned to hold herself better than anyone. In 1867, when Louise was 9, she and her younger sister Stephanie were sent to Austria for a visit, they were told, in reality, for molding. To the Habsburg court, to Emperor Franz Joseph and his famous wife Elizabeth, the very same Sissy. The Austrian court was not kind, but it was grand. And it was there that Louise first saw a woman she wanted not to fear, but to emulate. Sissy seemed created from different air. Not a queen, but a ballerina in chiffon, swaying on golden swings, with hair down to her knees and a gaze fixed on the eternal distance. Louise watched her with reverence. She understood. Beauty could be a strength if it was rebellion, not a tool of seduction, but a weapon against the system. And she decided, when she grew up, She would be like her, free, independent, radiant. But Belgium thought differently. There, a woman's freedom was measured by the length of her train and the humility in her eyes. A princess was meant to be not a person, but a figure, an adornment, a piece on the monarchy's chessboard. Louise did not yet know all the rules, but she already felt their suffocating weight. And as soon as the dream was born in the girl, to break free, to live by her heart, not by a schedule, the system began to build a wall around her. In the eyes of the court, she was considered an enviable match. A princess with a family name, a brilliant education, a substantial dowry, and a share in her father's African possessions. Louise was not a beauty in the classical sense, but the combination of a high forehead, lively eyes, and confident posture made her truly captivating. She knew how to carry herself, knew how to remain silent when necessary, and was not intimidated by looking a man of any rank in the eye. Even when the room grew cold from gazes and hot with anticipation, her father viewed his daughter as a geopolitical asset, not a child, but a resource. With each passing year, the circle of options narrowed around her. A prince from Prussia, a widower from Tuscany, a duke from Bavaria. But the choice fell on one of their own, her first cousin once removed, Prince Philippe of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. He was 14 years older than Louise, a military man, educated in the best Viennese traditions, a cavalry officer with a good bearing and a thick mustache. He was recommended as noble, restrained in his passions, with a reputation for honor. And the fact that he had actresses and gambling debts, well, who is without flaws? Louise was 17. She was shown his portrait, then him. He smiled, holding gloves in his hand, while she held her fears. She did not love him. She did not know him. She only knew there was no choice. The wedding took place in the summer of 1875, as expected, with a parade, music, and enthusiastic headlines. 1,000 lights along the Rue de la Monnaie, a tiara of diamond lilies, a golden carriage, a crowd rolling like a wave along the cobblestones. The newspapers wrote of a brilliant union, an ideal couple, the beginning of a new dynastic era. But inside Louise, anxiety grew, a dull, unconscious feeling like the pulse before a leap into water where the bottom is not visible. She did not know what was supposed to happen on their wedding night. Not a single novel, not one educational treatise had prepared her for what awaited behind closed doors. She had been taught to keep her back straight, to choose the right napkin to match the tablecloth, to nod at her governess when reminded of modesty. But no one explained what it was like to be given to a man without love and without the right to refuse. Felipe, on the contrary, feared nothing. He knew what he was doing. He was used to it, used to obedient women, to cabaret actresses, to the idea that a woman's body was a territory that could be occupied without diplomacy. He did not consider that before him was not a stage partner, but a girl for whom a touch was still a miracle, not an obligation.
What happened that night is known only from fragmented memories of a lady-in-waiting and letters. But one thing is clear: Louise left. not her marriage, but the room. She locked herself in other chambers, clutching the remnants of her dignity in her fingers. In the morning, she was found in the orangery, and the story that kings had dreamed of already showed its first crack. The Viennese in Brussels courts got to work. Persuasions, instructions, subtle manipulations. He loves you. It's just the first night. Be smart. Don't disgrace the family. Louise returned, not because she believed them, but because she didn't know where else to go. She had been taught to obey, but not taught to save herself. Thus began the life she was meant to live, as if someone else had written her script and put a period long before the beginning. The marriage, sealed to the accompaniment of fanfares, very quickly turned into a silent confrontation. Louise was not yet 18 when she realized that marriage was not a new life, but a slow disappearance. He, a pedantic officer, with a face like a lithograph from a military journal, irritated her by his very existence. Everything about him was too precise, too correct, too alien. She wanted tenderness. He offered routine. She dreamed of museums, theaters, trips to the Alps. He recorded her day in an official notebook. Breakfast at 8, visit to the Duchess, dinner at 6 o'clock. They argued immediately, not with scandals, but with icy stares and pursed lips. She would toss her train at him. He would make remarks. Louise did not remain silent. A restless energy churned within her, with nowhere to go. Vienna, with its etiquette and facades, made her feel like she was under a checkered ceiling. It shone, but it suffocated. And he was the guard of this cage. In their Viennese apartment, they lived not as spouses, but as cohabitants, united not by choice, but by formality. He didn't hit her, he simply didn't hear her. And she didn't cry, she just retreated to museums with whom she held silent conversations. In this joyless routine, a ray of light suddenly appeared. Archduke Rudolph, the Crown Prince, son of Emperor Franz Joseph, young, nervous, lively. He was different. He read books, laughed at balls, didn't speak in rehearsed phrases. Louise felt he was like her, suffocated in gold, but alive within. Together they rode horses, talked on park benches, discussed science, politics, poetry. In these conversations, Louise suddenly remembered that she was not just a wife, she was a human being. Those around them whispered that they were having an affair, but it wasn't that between them, it was recognition, understanding without explanation. Louise did not cross the line, although she could have, but therein lay her strength. Despite her loneliness, despite her hunger for love, she did not betray her sister, and Stephanie was the one who would soon become Rudolph's wife. In this tangled knot of feelings, duty, and royal machinations, Louise remained alone. And yet, beside Rudolph, for a brief moment, she felt she was not broken.
In Louise's family, meanwhile, changes were occurring. Children were born, two, a girl and a boy. But as often happens in dynasties, children did not save. They became proof of a successful marriage, but did not make it happy. Louise loved them in her own way, like a person who had been robbed of the right to her own youth. But even in motherhood, she felt there was no shoulder to lean on, only form, only protocol. She increasingly remembered Sissy, the one with the swings and the floor-length hair. Only now she understood even Sissy was a captive. She just learned to wave beautifully from her cage. Belgium became increasingly foreign to her. Her father ruled there, spending money on colonial campaigns and the attentions of a society favorite.
He didn't write to Louise, didn't invite her, wasn't interested. She had been erased from the family ledger, replaced by political schemes and bejeweled Amazons. Her mother also disappeared into the shadows of horses, hunts, and spoiled letters. And Vienna suffocated more and more. Louise walked through the palace halls as if through a museum of herself. Mirrors reflected a woman in a luxurious dress, but her gaze said, "I don't live here. I've been placed here." Sometimes she would go out into the garden at night, look at the darkening sky, and imagine what another life might look like, without errands, without nods, without balls. Just her, a horse, a road, and no one's orders. All this continued until a man appeared in her life who for the first time did not look at her as a princess, a wife, a function, but simply as a woman. But before that, there were still several steps. He entered her life not as a romance hero, but as a challenge to fate. A young Croatian with a hussar's bearing, a count by birth and an adjutant by profession, Geza Matacic. Louise was over 30. He was around 25. Against the backdrop of official Vienna, he seemed alive. He played the violin, laughed sincerely, wore a mustache that looked audacious, and most importantly, he looked at her not as a bored princess, but as a woman. Simply a woman. Not a political chess piece, not a wife who had disgraced the dynasty, not the mistress of empty apartments, but her, Louise. A feeling flared between them, not a whim, not coquetry, not flirtation, something far more dangerous. He was younger, of lower rank, utterly inappropriate from the perspective of protocol. But beside him, for the first time in many years, Louise breathed deeply. Together they rode, discussed books, went on picnics where she laughed not like an aristocrat, but like a girl. This romance was her defiance against everything that suppressed her, against a marriage that had not become love, against a father who had not become a support, against a court that had made her a living mannequin of well-being. News of their affair spread quickly. Vienna gasped, Brussels hissed. A princess and a Croatian. It sounded like a provocation. Philip, Louise's husband, reacted sharply. He cut off her access to finances, kicked her out of official residences. This was no longer a marriage. It was a repressive regime. She was outside the budget, outside the system, outside propriety. But Louise did not back down. On the contrary, she did what no one expected of her. She left, abandoned everything. She left with Matacic for Paris.
This was an escape not only from the country, but from the construct in which she existed. She had broken a taboo, a princess left with her lover, for a world where no one would offer her a hand at a reception, where doors were closed, where every action she took would become a scandal. And yet, she chose it. She chose not reputation, but love. Philippe challenged Geza to a duel. This was not a theatrical scene, but a real clash of swords. On February 19, 1898, in Vienna, before witnesses, the Count was wounded in the arm. Honor restored, on paper, but Louise did not return. She could no longer. To return would have meant betraying herself, and so she fought. She tried to obtain a divorce. Court, hearings, correspondence, attempts to break her mentally and financially. Nothing. Her father, King Leopold, publicly disowned her. Her sister Stephanie was ordered not to communicate with her. Former friends disappeared. All that remained of Louise was a shadow in the newspapers, the shame of the family, an obsessed woman, an hysterical woman with a Viennese Croatian. They missed the main point. This was a love story that decided to be more important than the throne. But feelings do not save from the system. When Louise ran out of money, she asked for help. She was refused. Matacic tried to salvage the situation. He took a desperate step. He forged Stephanie's signature on a financial document, hoping to get a loan. He was arrested. Trial. Verdict: 4 years. And Louise was offered a deal: return to her husband or go to an asylum, a psychiatric one. The diagnosis was quickly made: neurasthenia, moral instability. It sounded more noble than too alive. This is how the system protects itself from those who refuse to be marble statues. And so she, a princess with a tiara, a brilliant past, a rich dowry, found herself in the corridor of a locked institution, among orderlies, sedatives, and bars, so far from balls, from emperors, from childhood dreams, but also so close to the truth. The night was dark and starless like her fate at that moment. Somewhere beyond the walls, the world. But here, white corridors, closed windows, alien gazes. In the asylum for nervously exhausted patients, they called her nothing less than Madame. No one spoke her name. Princess, yes, but not here. Here she was a body under supervision, a case in a medical journal. She was deprived of her surname, her lineage, her title, her status now inconvenient. The diagnosis was not medicine, but a sentence. A woman who runs away with her lover, fights for a divorce, demands money from the king, cannot be healthy in the opinion of those who themselves hold power. This is how the monarchy operated. Reputations were saved by breaking bones. Louise chose not to return to her husband, and therefore bars, handcuffs, a therapeutic regimen. But the system miscalculated one thing. Louise was no longer that girl with satin bows. She was a woman who had walked the edge. In the winter of 1904, she did the impossible. Together with an orderly she managed to bribe, she planned an escape. At night, when the ward had fallen asleep, she cut the metal rods of the window bars. Her fingers were bloody. The cold bit into her lungs. She wore a man's overcoat over her nightgown. Through the snow, knee-deep, she walked to the station, not looking back. Every step was like a challenge to history itself. You wanted to imprison me, but I am going again. She boarded a train, not as a fugitive, but as a person reclaiming her life. Through Switzerland to Italy, then to the south of France. There, in snowy Montparnasse, Geza Matacic was waiting for her again. He had already been released from prison, thinner, but just as much in love. There was no triumph in this meeting, not even tears, only the silence of two people who had gone through hell and remained alive.
But the royal machine does not forgive. Leopold II deprived Louise of her allowance. She was left without an inheritance, without support, without a country. And yet, she found herself. The marriage was finally annulled, not at her initiative, but by the will of her ex-husband, who was tired of newspapers writing not about his dress uniform, but about his runaway wife. She and Geza wandered through cheap hotels, lived in modest boarding houses. Matacic spent money as if he had plenty. Louise pawned family jewelry. She still had pearls and earrings, a memory of those balls where she walked like a mannequin princess. Now they were exchanged for dinner and heating. But she did not complain. For the first time, she lived by her own will. Sometimes they would sit on the balcony of a cheap cafe, and Louise would say, "I was a statue. Now I am living." But freedom bought at such a price is rarely easy. The court assigned her a pension, 100,000 francs, but almost all of it went to Maticic's debts. He was not a saint, but he was her choice, and that is more valuable than crowns. Louise still called herself a princess, but now, not Belgian, a princess of a lost country where women are forbidden to feel. She didn't run away from her husband. She ran away from a world where everything is decided for you. And in this escape lies her entire essence. With each passing year, her name sounded less and less often. The newspapers forgot. Her sisters remained silent. The European courts struck her out. But Louise, she was still there. Not a chronicle heroine, not a scandal figure, but a woman without an address, without a country, without a title. Her passport read, Madame de Retival. It was simpler, safer, and thus definitive. When Leopold II died in 1909, Louise filed a lawsuit demanding the return of her fortune. Not palaces, not carriages, not emeralds. She wanted recognition. Her capital had been unlawfully withheld. The princess, finding herself in poverty, demanded justice from the king. They did not listen to her. The case dragged on. Bureaucracy stretched the process like a caterpillar in a cocoon from which no butterfly would emerge. Only after her father's death was she paid meager interest, a gesture of mercy, not a gesture of truth. When the Great War began, Louise was living in Geneva. The Germans were entering Belgium. Newspapers screamed about peace crumbling before their eyes. Matičić was interned as a subject of Austria-Hungary, and she was left alone. Her son, Leopold Clement, died in 1916. His death, like an ice stone, finally froze within her. Another meaning, gone. Another name, lost. Matičić returned, but he was different now. Broken, ruined, tired. In 1922, he passed away forever. Louise was paid a small annuity on the condition that she would not appear in Schleswig-Holstein and would not mention herself publicly. A quiet deal for oblivion. History does not like inconvenient living people, only convenient dead ones. She moved to Wiesbaden, a mineral spa, where aristocrats once came to treat their exhaustion. Now lived the elderly, left without a homeland. She rented a modest room, sat in the winter garden, and listened to the dripping. Time took away friends, health, even her voice. Arthritis clenched her hands as if asking, "Are you still here?" On March 1st, 1924, her heart gave out. She was buried without an orchestra, without a procession, without mourning ribbons. On her tombstone, no crown, no title, just a name. And among the things found in her trunk, a note was discovered. A small sheet, faded ink. At the bottom, her handwriting, "I served only my heart." Thus ends the story of a princess who refused to be a function. She lost, by all accounts, but she remained herself, not a role, not a paragraph, but a voice that we can finally hear.